Okay, in this part of the demo, this is part 3, we're going to go ahead and dive into starting the design. And the tools that we're going to cover largely in this demonstration are going to be typography tools and how we're going to convert type into shapes and some other things too. But let's just get going on it. I'm also going to introduce this as a color model and talk about color model that you should use when you're working with web files. Now, we started off with this kind of the sketch, and if you know, have your own thing that you're messing around with, you might want to take some colored pencils, or you could even do this and come in and like color it in with Photoshop or play around with it or whatever. But this is kind of where I decided I wanted to go with it with this set of colors. So and this is kind of the way I wanted it to look. So based on this, let's go ahead and try to achieve this. Okay, so let's go to Photoshop. First thing I want to do is I want to make a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make something that is 500 by 500 at 72 ppi. Okay. The other thing that I want to be sure to do is down where it says color profile. Oh, first of all, also color mode should be RGB. Do not use CMYK or some grayscale or something. Use RGB because this is intended for the screen, and screens are going to be presenting in red, green, and blue because of those are the light primaries. And where it says color profile, we're going to be using this sRGB. Don't use these other ones for this particular set of assignments. You're going to use sRGB. S stands for standard, so it's standard RGB. And there is a thing called the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and they have sort of set sRGB as the standard, so that what you see on your screen is probably what someone else will see on the screen. So this is a normal, it's called a working space or color profile. So, and then we're going to go ahead, and if you want to give this a title, you could. We'll just call this logo. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And before I get too much further, I just want to show you something really fast. Since I did choose that color model, if I were to go up to Edit and then go to Color Settings, you'll notice that my working space is set to RGB. All right. Now, had I chosen a different different color model or working space, when I set the file up, it would show something different here. The other thing too is where it says Manage Color Management Policies. I would recommend that while you're working with web files, instead of preserving embedded profiles, and what that means is that if you open other people's images up, it's going to automatically choose to preserve their embedded profile so that they have something that's a different profile. Then you're going to be automatically working with, you know, multiple different profiles, which can be confusing and your color can be weird. And so you can just turn that to off. You can always turn that back on if you need to do something later with other stuff. But anyway, this is a good way to get started. We'll say OK. And then, you know, if you wanted, you could also, by the way, have saved that. Let's just go back to color settings. And if I wanted to, I could go here and I could save this as a color profile, and then I could always just load it at any time. So let's just call this, let's call it web settings, like this or something like that. And then it's going to ask you if you want to put a comment in here, and you could just say this is for web files or something like that using sRGB. Okay, you don't have to do that though. And then anytime that you change to a different profile, you can just come here and hit load, and then you just load the right profile, and it's going to ask you which one you want. And there's your web settings profile. You can also, the nice thing is you can export that profile. You can take it with you. You can also drop it into a set of files if you're giving a set of files over to somebody else to work on, so that they know what color profiles to use. Anyway, so there's that. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to set up a grid system. I think that that's really helpful to have that started from the beginning. First thing is, if your rulers out here in the margins are turned off, so if you start off and it looks like that, you can hit Command R for ruler on a Mac or Control R on a Windows computer, and it'll toggle your rulers. If for some reason your rulers are not showing in pixels like mine, you can right click on that ruler and you can choose the unit of measure right here. I'm going to choose pixels because we're doing stuff in the web setting, and that's the basis of the unit of measure. So if I go up here also to Photoshop and I go to preferences, I can also go down to guides, grids, and this is the way I'm going to set this up, because if you look at, let's just jump back over here real quick. Let's get that out of the way actually. If you jump back over here, what I've got is a circle. I'm going to start just by making the circle. Just forget the typography down here. Well, I'm just going to make like a square file that's going to deal with this circle. So I'm just going to do something that has like a dead center, okay? So let's jump back over here to Photoshop, and so that means if my image is 500 by 500, I want a grid line every 250 pixels. That's going to divide it in half, both vertically and horizontally, and then I can do 2 subdivisions, so those sections will get divided in half as well. So if I go and click OK, I can't see it unless I go up here to View, and then I can go to Show and Grid. Okay, and so then you can see my dead center. Now let's move on getting our typography together. So first thing I want to do is I want to, over in my tool panel, I want to select the T for type, and you'll notice that up here in the options panel it automatically changes to the typography options, and I currently have the thing that I want selected, which is Century Gothic Bold. You can use whatever you want. And something I need to bring up really quick that's important is about the typography and fonts. So right now I'm just sort of haphazardly choosing the font that I like, that I have in my system, that comes with my Adobe stuff. But the reality is that this is something you need to know when you're designing to give and hand off to somebody else, is that whoever is going to be implementing that website, they're going to have it's called a web font license. They're going to have a license in order to use that font on the web. And it's kind of more complicated than you might think, but and we're not going to go into all of that. I just want you to be aware of that. Adobe does have some provisions for web fonts. It's very limited with a standard Creative Cloud package. So that's, for that reason, I'm not going to go really into it all that much. For this assignment, go ahead and use whatever font you need to. Just be aware that if you're ever working on a real project with other designers or with other developers for the web, that you need to be aware of that, and you need to discuss the font issues with the organization to make sure that you're going to be able to work within those boundaries and use that font. And you might ask, well, why can't I just store it in a picture file? There are occasions where you can do that and it's okay, but by and large, it's sort of like a practice that's fallen by the wayside because it's not very ADA accessible for people who have disabilities. Like if you're blind and you're using a screen reader, somebody cannot read a font that is stored inside of an image picture file because those are binary files. They're not fonts. It's not read as typography. So there's some sort of ways around that. But anyway, you use whatever font you would like in this exercise. And then I'm gonna, it says that it's starting out at 36. And if you're not sure how big something's going to be, then you can go ahead and start there. So let's just type. And I'm going to type the letters WM. Okay, and you'll notice that the color is white, which is up here. So if I click on this, I can, for right now, I don't care what I pick. I'm just going to pick some color. I'll pick black, and then that's WM. Well, 36 is obviously way too small if I'm supposed to be filling up this whole 500 by 500 space. So you can either go to the menu for window and choose the character layer, or the other thing that you can do is you can do Command T on a Mac or Control T on Windows, and it'll automatically pull up your character palette over here. All right, so while I have my type selected, I'm going to change the font size, And let's try somewhere in the ballpark of, I don't know, 242. I happen to know what size I want it to be. You might have to experiment. So if I choose the move tool now, I can kind of place it, and it looks like that's going to be about the right size once I change the overlapping nature of the W and the M, because this leg, this last leg of the W and the first leg of the M, those two are overlapping in my design here, and then I have to do some artsy stuff to kind of divide those things. So now, one of the things that if you're, you know, accustomed to doing other graphic design stuff is you might automatically say, okay, well, I want to select this and I want to adjust the letter spacing. Well, that will work technically, but it's not going to really do what we need it to do, because we have, in our design, we have the W as one color and the M as another color. And ultimately what I'm going to do so that I can modify these letter forms, if you look back at our design, is because these letter forms are modified, I have to turn those into a vector shape. And so if I create something that is W and M all as this, like in the same type object, or the type layer, all right, this is the type layer here, then when I go to convert it to a shape, I can't have those be two different colors. It'll automatically convert it into one. So to show you what I'm talking about, let's just make the W a color, just so you'll see what I'm talking about. And I'm going to change the color over here. You could also do it here as well in the top options panel. I'm just randomly picking a color right now. I'm not dealing with color completely yet. But if I wanted to change the letter spacing in between, I could go over here. Let's pull my character panel out so you can see it better. If I come here to where I've got my letter spacing, if I do like a -100 to pull those things closer together, you'll see that they start coming closer. And I can start to overlap them. I could go as crazy as, let's try like a -300 or something like that. And then that's getting a lot closer to what I really want, okay? But if the thing that we're going to have to do in order to fool around with this space in between is we're going to have to convert this into a vector shape so that it's no longer editable typography. And so let me show you what happens if I go and I try to convert this type layer to a vector. So in my layers panel, I'm going to select the layer, the WM, and then if I go up here to type and then I say convert to shape, you see it automatically turns everything into one color. And I don't want that. I mean, I could work with that. There's things I could do, but they're going to be a lot harder for me to do them this way than if I just make them separate letters. So I'm going to hit the undo key, which is Command Z or Control Z. And I'm actually going to get this M, and I'm going to make that go away. So now I've got my W. My type layer automatically updates itself when I change it, when it's actually true type. Okay, and now the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to drag this to the new layer, this layer over here in my layer panel. And now it made something called W copy. Well, the reason I did that is that I've already got the type selected. It's already aligned the way I want it. So now all I would need to do while, let me move this panel out of the way, while the W copy layer is selected, all I need to do then is go over here to my type tool, select it, and change it to the letter M. And that's very interesting looking, but that's not really what I want. So if I jump to my move tool, I can kind of slide it over, and then you can see that I start to get something that's a little bit more agreeable with what I'm trying to do. But now I've got these two things as red, so it's hard for me to distinguish which ones are which. So I'm going to go ahead here and highlight that M, and I'm going to change it just so I can see. I'm going to randomly pick some other color for right now. Okay, because we're going to talk about color in just a minute. Now you'll see that I have both layers over here. I'm going to dock my character panel back up here, so get it out of the way. So if I choose both layers over here in the layer panel, now I can move them together, and let's just sort of try to stick them a little bit more in the center. I'm going to click and hold, holding down the Shift key, and I move them over and try to get them sort of centered, and I can start to work with them a little bit better now.